Chapter 18: The Entertaining Robot. The children wandered out behind the farm buildings, through a clearing, and over to an old oak tree. It was the same tree their father had climbed when he was a boy. Mr. Sharif's initials were carved into the bark, at the bottom of a long list of initials. For generations, all the Sharifs had carved their initials into that tree, going back to the ancestors who first built the farm. Someday the children would add their initials to the list. Beneath the leafy branches was a scattering of acorns. Jad cleared a spot for himself, sat down, and pulled a small computer from his pocket while Jaya climbed above. The siblings spent the afternoon there, lazying around the tree until the robot marched past carrying the big, heavy toolbox. "What you doing, Roz?" called Jad. The robot stopped. "The drone has crash landed again," she said. "I am going to fix it again. Do you need any help?" "I do not need any help." "I'm bored," said Jaya, her legs dangling above her brother's head. "Can you do something fun, Roz?" The robot put down her toolbox and said, "What would you like me to do?" "I don't know," said Jaya, thinking hard. "Can you do a backflip?" "Yes, I can do a backflip." A grin spread across the girl's face. "Roz, I order you to do a backflip." At that, Roz crouched, and then she leapt into the air, flipped backward, and gently landed on her feet. A perfect backflip. Jad put his computer away. Jaya jumped down from her branch. The children were impressed. "What else can you do?" said Jad. "Can you juggle?" "Yes, I can juggle." "I order you to juggle, some of the acorns." Roz walked up to the tree, picked 3 large acorns from the ground, and began juggling them in perfect rhythm. Jaya studied the robot's movements and then began tossing acorns into the air as well. The first one went a little too high. The next one went a little too far, and soon they all went tumbling back into the grass. "Do you know any jokes?" said Jad. "Why did the chicken cross the road?" "Never mind." Jad scratched his head. "Can you tell us a story?" "What kind of story would you like to hear?" "A robot story," said Jad. "An animal story," said Jaya. "How about a robot and animal story?" said Roz. The children smiled at each other. Then they sat against the tree and looked up at their robotic storyteller. "Once upon a time, there was a robot who lived alone on an island," Roz began. She spent her time wandering across mountains and forests and meadows, and then something terrible happened. Rocks fell and the robot tumbled off a cliff. She survived the fall, but sadly, the rocks killed 2 geese and smashed 4 of their eggs. The robot stood there, staring at the poor goose family, until she heard a tiny voice peeping from somewhere nearby. She followed the peeping noise and discovered a perfect goose egg, sunk in the dirt. The robot carefully picked up the egg and carried it away, and when the gosling hatched from his shell, the first thing he saw was the robot looking back. "Mama, Mama," he peeped. The gosling thought the robot was his mother, and from that day on, she was. The robot adopted the gosling as her son, and together they made a funny little happy family. The end. The children sat there and thought about Roz's strange story. Then they looked up at her and said, "What happened next?" Chapter 19: The Storytellers. Roz and the children had a new routine. Several times a week, they'd gather beneath the oak tree, and Roz would tell stories about the robot on the island. The children loved hearing how the robot survived mudslides and bear attacks and harsh winter weather. They loved hearing how she befriended an island animal. But the stories they loved most were about the robot and her son, the goose. He sounded like such a nice goose. Roz told the children story after story after story. What she didn't tell them, what she couldn't tell them, was that the stories were true, and they were about her. The children wanted to get in on the storytelling fun. Jaya told adventure stories about dragons and monsters. Jad told silly stories about aliens in outer space. But as the children grew more comfortable with Roz, they began talking about their own lives. They talked about growing up way out in the country. They talked about their schoolmates and their friends and their family. They talked about how their parents used to work together around the farm and how perfect everything was before the accident. In an instant, their lives were appended. Their was gone and their father was injured. Mr. Sharif tried to keep the farm going by himself, but there was too much to do, and he was so weak now. The farm machines powered along, doing their jobs as usual, but they needed to be maintained and monitored. Eventually, the machines started breaking down, and the farm started falling to pieces. The children wondered if life would ever feel normal again. "That's why we got you, Roz," said the girl. "We needed you to save this place." "And that's exactly what you're doing," said the boy with a smile. Chapter 20: The Wild Animals. Wildlife can be very good for farmland. Insects pollinate the plants, snakes eat pests. The droppings of rodents and birds and every other animal acts as a natural fertilizer. Roz wanted more of those helpful creatures on the farm, so she let the unused sections of land go wild. Up from the ground emerged native weeds, flowers, woody brambles, and with the wild plants came wild animals. But then some creatures came sulking around who were not helpful at all. It started when Roz noticed a heavy scent floating on the breeze. She followed the scent out to a narrow strip of forest on the edge of the property. There were clumps of fur in the undergrowth and claw marks in the dirt. There was blood, too. Lots of it. And then she found the carcass. A deer had recently been killed and eaten. The robot's head slowly spun around as she scanned the area. Not far from the carcass was a pile of droppings. It looked like it might have come from a dog, but Oscar wasn't large enough or ferocious enough to kill a deer. What kind of animal could have done this? Roz had been standing there at the edge of the property for a while. She imagined Mr. Sharif in his office, sitting at his computer, eyeing her location on the map. Any minute now, he would hobble out of his truck and come racing down the driveway to check on her. Roz didn't want to upset the man, so she left the carcass where it was and returned to her work. But from then on, she kept a careful watch for any more signs of trouble.